Welcome everyone to this new edition of our Great Talks on Sports Development and Peace with Mr. Giovanni Di Cola, who is a sports expert, he's a researcher, he's a writer, and also what we could call a sports activist. While initiated by athletes and sports leaders and institutions in the early 90s, Sports for Development and Peace only became a coherent social movement through the United Nations, its agencies, and other international bodies such as the Commonwealth a decade later. The starting point was the decision by the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2001 to appoint a special advisor and create an Office for Sport Development and Peace, UNOSDP. The first special advisor was Adolf Ogi, with whom Giovanni had the opportunity to collaborate. Giovanni will walk us through the evolution of sports in the developmental agenda and project us in its future and the role that sports could play in the post-2030 agenda. Giovanni Di Cola is a special advisor to the Deputy Director General for Field Operations and Partnerships at the International Labour Organization. He has served for UN agencies such as UNESCO, UNFPA, UNICEF and ILO, with assignments at the UN Secretariat to implement the UN reform. He undertook field assignments in Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, and at the national level in UNICEF. Giovanni Di Cola is a special advisor to the Deputy Director General for Field Operations and Partnerships of the International Labour Organization. He has served in 4 UN agencies: UNESCO, UNFPA, UNICEF, and ILO. He represented the ILO in the UN Task Force and contributed to the UN Secretary General Report on Sport for Development and Peace and assisted the UN Special Advisor on engaging the world of sport and UN agencies. In April 2015, he was appointed Special Advisor on Multilateral Affairs in the Office of the Deputy Director General for Field Operations and Partnerships at the headquarters of the ILO in Geneva, dealing with matters related to climate change, sustainable development goals, and to mega sporting events and decent work. He has published books and articles particularly on skills for employability through and in sports, and has provided advice to sport federations on matters of development cooperation, common frameworks, and sustainability over the years. As always, our Greytalk's Vice President, Manuela Tortora, will concentrate and will group all the questions that will be formulated to Giovanni Di Cola, and actually she will be acting as our Master of Ceremonies. So please, Manuela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Welcome to Mr. Di Cola, to this great talk. Welcome, everybody. The rules of the game are, as usual, extremely simple. We will listen to Mr. Di Cola's presentation of whatever he would like to highlight regarding the topic per se, as well as his activities regarding this topic. I think, Mr. Di Cola, around 20 to 30 minutes, is that okay? And then we will open the question and answer sessions. As usual, you have on the corner, on the right column of your screen, the chat windows. Please write down your questions or comments, unless you prefer simply to raise your hand and open your mic. And by the way, I would be grateful if everybody closes, I think they are closed, all of them already, close the mic during the presentation, because otherwise the sound is not very accurate. So for this very energizing topic, Mr. Di Cola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Manuela. Thank you, Alejandro. And happy to see all of you, and also to discover some former colleagues over the talk, particularly David and somehow Cecile, even though we don't belong to the same agency. And of course, Alejandro was on top of it, my boss in Lima when I was in Lima. So as Deputy Regional Director, and I was in charge with programming at the time. In fact, let me start by saying an anecdote about this, because we were together in Lima in Peru, And I was running every day to prepare the New York City Marathon, and with the group of runners, which they called themselves Peru runners. And in this group, we were able to have the most diverse group of Lima. For those of you who know Peru, you may recall that Peru is socially, it is not so integrated as it appears, to say the least. And of course, that was quite some time ago. So certainly they have progressed from all fronts, Peru socially, economically, including institutionally. But at the time, having the opportunity to go down every morning, very early morning, and to have this kind of chat with people coming from all over, sometimes people coming from really outside the residential areas of Lima was a way to know better the country. Then one of these, actually the leader of this group was very fond of allowing others, foreigners, to know the country. So he invited me to Huancayo, and I went to Huancayo, which is a place really au plateau, and where there is a conscience and there is a culture of runners, and kids are actually brought into, like, here or elsewhere, football, what they do, they run, but they run at 4,000 meters, which you might believe it is not the same as running at sea level or lake level. And then I was brought into this, and then there were other opportunities, and I was called by a colleague of mine from the FAO, the director of FAO at the time, and he asked some support to organize a crazy run in the Inca Trail. And then I got into this, and actually I organized 2 Inca Trail runs with local sponsors. I mean, I did something which, and then at the end, when I was due to come back to Geneva to the headquarters, people said, "Why are you leaving? You should stay here and organize the runs." Anyway, to be brief on this, I wrote an article when I came back here, and I explained the importance of sport for social and economic activities. And then I indicated the case of Peru. And this led me to get in touch with Jean Fabre, who was at the time part of a group with the IOC. And that's the way I got into this. I started to basically look into this with others, complices, and then I had already discussed this with the cabinet of the Director General at the time, Maria Ducci and Juan Somavia. And Maria Ducci told me, yeah, this is an interesting topic, keep it up and so on. But there was nothing to actually discuss this matter until the Secretary General Kofi Annan at the time appointed Adolf Ogi as his special advisor. So we had a number of exchanges, and I went to see Adolf Ogi myself, and I said, look, Mr. Ogi, I want to work with you on this. And Adolf Ogi is somebody who is quite generous, and he looks at you, and if you are interested, then if you are committed, he needs you. He knows where to find you. So not only that, but actually came to the ILO. I was already working with him. I think he called the ILO and said, I need this guy to work with my team. It was not a formal detachment. It was, the ILO was okay with having a system of focal points. And that's how I got into this. And then I remember once we had a meeting with Juan Somavia and Adolf Ogi. Juan Somavia was saying, basically, you are working with Di Cola, but you could work with all the offices of the ILO throughout the world. You imagine, Cecile, the discussion. And Adolf Ogi, no, I need him. That kind of, so I don't want to overemphasize that kind of relationship, but there was a commitment. And I participated in the task force, which we provided the UNSG with the report on the first report on sport development and peace, which actually is a good piece. Even today, if you look at it, it has a lot of knowledge, and simply because the quality of the agencies. When you put agencies together and say, look, you have to work together, you have to produce something, the quality of the output is in general something good. It's not something light or, you know, so that was the case. Now, back, this was in 2003. So what has happened between 2003 and now? Basically, the fact that the shift is more holistic now than it was at the time. Before it was essentially sectorial approach. So it was sport and health, sport and labor, sport and social issues, sport and inclusion, and so on. So nowadays with the SDGs, the framework is different. We need to work together. Interdisciplinarity is key. Others call it holistic approach. Others call it, you know, the issue that SDGs need to integrate with each other and basically need to reinforce each other in the way they must be implemented. So this is one issue that I think differs from what it was at the time. The second issue is when Ogi started all this movement somehow from the UN, it became a movement. The movement got very excited because, you know, people get passionate about sport for a reason or another, a good passion, even bad passion sometimes from the fan side. But they started to, you know, academics, diplomats, UN agencies and so on to come up front and indicating a number of pathways. Not all of them were practicable and worth to be taken, I must say. But this is, you know, afterward, a kind of evaluation. I've been involved in this for many years, almost 3 decades, even when I didn't want to, because I do have a job. This is one task out of the job I do have, and I had in the past. It was coming back to me in a way or another. So like, you know, you have to contribute somehow. Even the article I wrote and I sent it to Bertrand and to Alejandro, in reality was against my will, because I didn't want, as I am involved somehow in the Centers for Sport and Human Rights on behalf of the cabinet of the DG, I didn't want to, you know, say something that would, and then it was a good reflection after all. I mean, I've been working on this for a few months and reviewing a number of texts, and this is what I released to you, and then we can have question and answer. Basically, this movement was supposed to address the issue from a rights-based perspective. It was not the case. For some reason, it was not the case. And now we see the difficulties and why we have a number of platforms on integrity, on human rights, on safeguarding, and so on protection. The second issue is that it got convoluted because, you know, when you have different partners, you need to organize them in a way or another. And I'm not sure that the UN was particularly fit to organize a multi-stakeholders initiative of the kind. But perhaps it was ante litteram, because now we are more, you know, agile in doing this. So it was quite a surprise. Remember that this was called by, in 1999 when Kofi Annan went to Davos. And he went to Davos and indicated, you know, we need to put together leaders from sport, religious leaders from countries, and then we need to address some of those issues. So it was beyond sport as far as Kofi Annan was concerned. And then he gave a mission to Adolf Ogi by saying, you need to make sure that this works as a cooperative. It doesn't work as you know, one team only, but as a cooperative. Something gives and takes back something, which was not necessarily the case. There are 2 issues which I think needs to be emphasized here. The promotion of sport for development is different from development of sport. So sport institutions are only there to develop their disciplines and sport. They will never put money for projects related to sport and development, or even less for sport development and peace. So that's one misunderstanding which was created at the time, and I think it is being resolved by now. The second, which I have already mentioned, which I think is the strongest, and this leads us to recent developments I want to mention, is the fact that it was a rights-based approach agenda. And the problem is that sport has indicated over the last 2 decades that they have a lot of issues internally, issues of abuses, issue of lack of integrity, issue of governance. We even seen that with the Super League and the reaction from UEFA in a way. And the other issue was the independence of sport. But sport has been built around, you know, sport for all, recreational sport, but also elite sport. And elite sport is managed like events by events organizers. IOC is an event organizer. FIFA is an event organizer. UEFA is an event organizer before they can enter into topics that are extremely complicated, like integrity, for example. So, and I'm telling you something in a conference. I was in a conference, an official from FIFA did, but at the end of the day, we are event organizers. In other terms, we cannot cover all. So this partnership with the UN is not only achievable, which, I mean, with all these difficulties, but it is absolutely necessary. The third point, which I think is important, having a bilateral approach to those issues is extremely difficult, time-consuming, and not results-oriented. Because you know, in a mega sporting events, you have a value chain. You have a segment related to the organization of the event itself. You have ITC, you have the travel, you have the tourism, you have the services, you have the security. Now you also have security against the pandemic. So the point is, how do you address this from all perspectives? And on top of it, you have questions of rights. Because when you organize events in Rio, you touch basically interest by the communities, and the way you address the issue of communities can be conflictual. So the other point I want to make here is with respect to the independence of sport. If we go back to the Coubertin has a mention of sport which is basically elitist from the top and somehow segmented. So by reading it at the Coubertin, I can mention and quote some of the points that the Coubertin was making. He was making a point about autonomy and independence because we are the best. Basically, they say we are the best, we know what to do, we have the interest of sport at heart, and because we are gentlemen, not women, but basically essentially gentlemen, we know how to write this. And we recruit according to those principles. Now, if you show this kind of charter nowadays, you wonder, is that sufficient to take care of the society as it is, particularly the issue of diversity, the issue of rights, the issue of dialogue and so on? I think it is not. And I come to the conclusion of all this. I think that because some of these dialogues were going in parallel, the bulk, the node of the sport development and peace was not addressed at the core immediately. So, so we started to see a proliferation of platforms. One is a newly constituted Center for Sport and Human Rights, which is a very organized multi-stakeholders initiative supported by the government of Switzerland, supported heavily by the different actors of sport. So you have broadcasters and sponsors sitting there. You have federations. These include FIFA, UEFA, Commonwealth Games, UN agencies, of which ILO is a founding member, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is also a founding member, both having a permanent observer status. And then you have, of course, NGOs, particularly human rights defenders like Human Rights Watch, Transparency International, and others. And then you have the Institute for Human Rights and Business, for example, and you have other stakeholders close to this environment and ecosystem. And this has completely changed the scenario, because at the end, this is the kind of platform that interact with the IOC, interact with FIFA. Two examples, and I finish there. The example of the Ruggie report. You may remember the scandal of FIFA, and Ruggie was called not at the beginning of all the scandal, but by the end of, when they were trying to clean up a bit of a mess that was created from the events that we are all aware of. And they called a consultant who was actually a former advisor of the human rights advisor, John Ruggie from Harvard University. And he came there and he went and he did a report. This report is extremely interesting because it does put emphasis on the responsibility of FIFA, even though FIFA is not in control of all the issues. So it says you are responsible for your contracts, even though the governments are responsible for the implementation of the legislation. So when you engage, you need to engage by knowing exactly how to engage. And in this report, there were many, many points. I think there were 24 recommendations, and indicated that, it would take quite some time to get through all these recommendations. But it was a really kind of stepping stone with respect to all this that is now evolving towards more serious dialogues. The second example is the Agenda 2020 from the IOC. It was adopted in December 2014 until 2020. Now it has been revised in both sessions of the IOC Congress. The president of the IOC, Thomas Bach, he addressed and he said, look, if we don't change, we're going to be changed by others. It's better if we change because we know that we need to change, otherwise we'll be forced to change. And he made the call twice, which sometimes I think is unheard. The other issue is that the Director General of IOC, in a conference that is called the Sporting Chance Conference, normally until 2020 was organized every year since 2015 by the Center for Sport and Human Rights. He came to Paris, we were there, and he addressed the issue of capacity. He said, we do not have, contrary basically to the belief, we do not have all the capacity to address all these issues at the same time. So basically we need to partner. And this was reiterated just recently, a couple of months ago, by the IOC when he went in a virtual conference with the UNODC, the drugs control, UN Office for Drugs Control. So the point I'm trying to make is there are two issues here that needs to be considered. One is the capacity of sport federations, and we need to engage more in a way which is very determined, extremely positively, but also firmly towards the implementation of the different plans, including the plans of the sport federations. For example, the IOC sustainability strategy, to which we contributed. The second issue is the issue of autonomy of sport is being questioned by the athletes. So the athletes have two major issues at stake now, because they could not show their own sponsorship when they went to the games, and this has been disrupted by decision by judges. So this is Article 40 of the Charter of the IOC, which constituted a red line because they didn't want to move on this. The second issue is Article 50, which is you cannot manifest as an athlete at the games. Of course, particularly when you receive a medal and so on. Remember John Carlos at the games of Mexico. I mean, that was that was really important with respect even to Kaepernick, which he did manifest during the Trump administration at the NFL. But this is now disrupted because you have seen recently, just a month ago, during the qualification for European qualifiers, national teams having a T-shirt saying human rights in Qatar. And I will respond to question on Qatar. I don't want to continue because I can continue for an hour. My article is 25 pages and my references are up to 110. So I can continue for a long time. But I want to basically focus on those two things. First of all, importance of athletes more and more, and this will continue over time. The second issue is I think we need to engage with those who have the knowledge. And the knowledge is not only on the bilateral terms, individually, UNESCO, IOC, UNESCO, FIFA, ILO, UEFA and so on and so forth, but in a multi-stakeholders perspective. And of course, we clear denominations and clear lines of communication, as we usually do. I finish by quoting the ILO. The ILO stands for tripartism and social dialogue. And I think that social dialogue was very missing, as you may have noticed, from the discussion we had, particularly UEFA and the 12 clubs who wanted to create their own Super League. If they would have gone through European social dialogue, which existed in sport 20 years ago and 15 years ago, they would have probably achieved more than the reckless results that they all achieved together. And it shows also some problem of governance that UEFA and others have with respect to that kind of discussions, which would include the salary cap, negotiation, collective bargaining. In other terms, the revision of the model of the European model of sport, which is very different from the American one. So I want to stop here and perhaps, you know, having a conversation, questions, whatever. I can take the questions in French and even if in Italian, if you like. Thank you.
And in Spanish, I guess.
Indeed. In
Peruvian, in any case, right?
In Spanish, yes, indeed.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Giovanni. That was quite interesting, and particularly, introducing a topic which is by far, this is my impression, much more complex and complicated than what it seems superficially, right? I mean, I'm totally ignorant in this topic, but you flagged and just flagged several aspects which are extremely substantive, touching not only on values, which is probably the first layer, but also much more than just values, also legal and political and of course economic and financial issues that deserve to be explored more. I don't know if there are already questions from the floor. In any case, it is open to all of you. But in the meanwhile, while people may think about questions or comments, I have my own concern. I was looking at the website of the Center on Sport and Human Rights and Development, and I was just, navigating and trying to see the structure and the issues that are flagged there. And I found that there is a sort of window, a case study on Rwanda, right? Well, personally, I'm absolutely fan of Rwanda, and Rwandan people is one of my favorite countries in the world, certainly in Africa, because of what they went through and how they were able as a population, as a country, to overcome the tragedy of the genocide. And I found in the case study that is mentioned in the website, this explanation on how sport became an instrument in the context of the recovery and the phase of rebuilding the social tissue in the years and the phase after the genocide, particularly from the point of view of women, but not only women, but certainly women played a role in that sense. I would very much like if you could elaborate a little bit more this case of Rwanda, which I think obviously can be extrapolated to other countries that can use sport as a sort of healing after a war or a tragedy or a social disruption, such as the Rwanda's case, and particularly what sort of policies from the governmental perspective could be put in place or were put in place in the case of Rwanda to use in a systematic way the benefits of sport at the social level as a social healer. If this is possible, I think it would be interesting because then it touches on the political side also of the question.
Yes, actually is a very elaborated question. So I will try to respond starting from policies and frameworks, because this is one of the areas that in some cases we missed when this idea was launched in 2003 4, 6, I mean, those years. And I mean, we had a number of declarations which constituted a framework, but it was not holistic to the point where, for example, some of these, the ramification on peace, reconciliation, you know, humanitarian approach was actually how sport could contribute to it. And I also have, I wrote a critical analysis, in fact, on projects related to sport and refugees, because I do believe that this is basically what is lacking when it comes to, so the Rwanda case, basically it is because Rwanda, as you may know, is part of the Commonwealth. It is part of the Francophonie, but it's also part of the Commonwealth. The Rwanda former Minister of Foreign Affairs is the Secretary General of the Francophonie now, but Rwanda, particularly, as we all know, they speak English since, I would say, particularly since the genocide, and particularly after. And so, so Rwanda, I think, was interested on one side to be more proactive in terms of, you know, Commonwealth partners, but also Commonwealth is particularly proactive in terms of implementing the changes and making sure that some of these standards, including human rights standards, labor standards and others, are actually included in the bids. So that was one opportunity. So then out of it, Rwanda wanted to implement a plan, and the center was there to organize and to advise. But I also want to mention two issues. So on the peace and reconciliation, we have many cases, many cases of which are, I wouldn't say best practices, they are only practices. And I was in a conference I was in a conference in Washington, which was previous to the election of Gianni Infantino, and actually the organizers wanted to, you know, to have a discussions, but only one of the candidates at the time from South Africa presented himself, and Condoleezza Rice was in that conference. And I remember, because I was struck by the fact that, you know, I would not expect Condoleezza Rice there. I became a bit more sympathetic to her than I was before meeting or listening to her. And she's a sport player, because her father was a coach of the leagues at the university level. So when she speaks about sport, she said, you know, I didn't miss any Super Bowl. I didn't miss a Super Bowl. I cannot even miss a Super Bowl, even when I'm on mission. And once I was on mission for the dialogues, the Palestinian and Israelis, and I was able to get in touch and so on and so forth. But what she said, they said, you know, we do not have a sport minister in the United States, but we use the sport people and champions to make our own ambassadors. And that is the way we, you know, basically we create space either for dialogues of occasions of peace and so on. For long, we have talked about ping pong diplomacy, which was, you know, the restart of the talks between USA and China. But I can tell you, because I was twice involved in this discussion with Taekwondo particularly, that South Korea and North Korea, they always use any opportunity, which it can be Taekwondo, it can be Pyeongchang. Remember Pyeongchang in South Korea, the sister of the leader of North Korea was invited, and she participated to Pyeongchang. And because she was well treated, so well treated, that basically, you know, they restarted to have warmer relationship between the two countries. So you will have a number of countries that they always will focus on organizing events to make sure that they can create spaces for dialogues. I think the importance is that we do not link enough policy frameworks. For example, for refugees, we create projects which are very project oriented, in other terms, outputs in terms of results, but we do not create space for major projects, programs, or even implementing policy. So I have the specific interest in recommendation 205 of the ILO, which basically allows for refugees to work. I see the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights coming to the ILC, indicating, you know, we need to use the recommendation 205. Yet when you talk with the mid-level officials, it seems difficult to get this framework, policy frameworks to exist to organize. So imagine the impact if we would work at the level of policies. I can give other examples, but I don't want to miss the opportunity of Rwanda. Just one issue. There are two cases which are abnormal cases, one in Haiti, another one in Afghanistan, where entire teams of women players were abused by presidents of federations, sport federations, national football federations in both countries. And the system was so, I mean, organized that they couldn't claim anything. They couldn't denounce. There was no whistleblowing or whatsoever. It is thanks to the Center for Sport and Human Rights that we finally get to address those cases. And the issue nowadays is that you can address the case at the individual level, and then you go up to the team, you go up to the bank, in the back to support the families, even to protect those athletes, and to exfiltrate for their own country. So, I mean, I don't know where the women from the national team of Afghanistan are, but I know we are in a safe place because we have governments who are also taking care of this. So we, you know, the intel is such that we can gather this information, then we can address. If we were only addressing bilaterally, we could not address those issues. So it's from the individual to the teams, to the federation, to the legislation at the national level, which involves justice, Ministry of Interior, and so on, not sport. And then you have also, it trickles down or up effects because they need to change the charter at the level of FIFA, because otherwise these kind of cases will repeat itself. So that's where we are now. So the case of Rwanda was somehow a good case because it's for reconciliation. The case of Haiti is absolutely hatred because it's abnormal, it's absolutely inconceivable. You have criminal, you have actually a penal, how do you say, the things that have happened in countries with, I mean, trafficking of children for prostitution to United States from other countries, inducted by people from Haiti, particularly the president who now has been banned for life from sport. So I think we are in that kind of process. I think we need to make sure that this is organized, is transparent, but we can help people. We can help people. I'm not sure that individually one organization alone could be doing all this kind of work.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. We have a question here from David Dror.
Yes, I see this.
Yes, he refers to the issue of experts like you. Would you agree that sports for development means enhancements of sports activities at the base of the pyramid? How does the UN in general and ILO in particular do to promote such expansion at the basis level, I guess?
So, this question, yes, very articulated as well. So, at the level of the ILO, let's say, because it's the ILO has an historical background in sport, which drives us back to 1924, even before to 1919 at the origin of the organization, because de Coubertin came to the ILO and he was basically shaking the tree and going to see. The director of the ILO at the time, it was called director, and he was, you know, say, you have to take care of this. You have to take care of so the ILO at the time was where the chateau of the Red Cross is, as you may imagine. So it was coming there, and it was actually, and I saw the notes in the archives where basically my own colleagues, our own colleagues, David, were saying like, you know, say this guy is, you know, he's full of ideas, he's too creative, you know. We don't know where to go, but he developed a relationship with with the director of the ILO at the time. And then they even did a committee of experts where he was expert of the committee of experts. And then they developed, all this resulted in a resolution on spare time, which historically is interesting because spare time was, the workers were working far more than 8 hours a day. So the idea was we reduce to 8 hours, what do they do? And so the idea was they need to have infrastructure, they need to have recreational activities and so on. So it's quite vast. Then we had a number of, it was not repeated itself, these efforts in 24, but then we have an MOU in 1998 with the IOC, but the ILO participated somehow in all the events of the game since 1992 until recently. But it's only with London, it's with Tokyo, with Rio, where actually there is a dialogue with the organizers of the games. So we have a dialogue with the organization of the games. So we put in place a number of typical ILO services. Then finally, in January 2020, there has been the first ever, since 24, the first ever tripartite meeting on sport, which is called decent work in the sector of sport, in sport. And they came up with a document which is called the points of consensus, basically agreed by the tripartite. And I was expert in that. I was called as expert, so I was very proud because you said, the first expert was the Coubertin, the second one, but I was not alone, so don't worry. I will not profile myself to the point of Coubertin, but only as a server to the organization and the constituents. But it was interesting because the reaction from the sport organization was astonishing. They never, ever had seen negotiation going on every single paragraph, as you may imagine, which actually is the core of social dialogue. So collective bargaining, freedom of association. So they were astonished and somehow well impressed. Like saying, the ILO is an organization that, engages in those issues and comes to agreement. So they couldn't even, figure out that sometimes on some wording, on some paragraph, they took the time to negotiate. So I respond to that one. I think it's, and I can provide you with the detail in case. The other issue, the base of the pyramid, I think that there has been somehow a consistent and legitimate concern by the sport development and peace community to deal with sport from the perspective of grassroots. So we forget the rest somehow. But the point is that it is not funded. So if we take the example of health, there is a GAPA, there is a global action plan on physical activity. The issue is to make sure that governments put resources for physical activities. Now, for example, the issue of, which by the way, has a lot of impact on health. So all the non-communicable diseases could be addressed by basically doing more sport, but most of all monitored and evaluated. So I give you an anecdote. I was in Cuba for work. I mean, I was on mission, and the mission was more on local economic development. But then, of course, I was driven by this passion. I want to see the director of sport, which was not an easy task if you go to a country where things must be organized before going. So can I see the director of, and the director was explaining to me that they were actually those who had a problem of cardiac problems. They were monitored because they did a kind of on top of on the roof of the Ministry of Health, and so all the officials who were related to the ministry, they were monitored their situation, the health situation, by physical activities, and 95% were at some. So they didn't take any drugs or medicine or whatsoever. That was the way. And I was surprised because once in another conference we were in Doha, And the present, the actual president, the Lord Sebastian Coe, who organized the games in London, actually was there. He was not yet the chair of London 2014 or 2012. And he actually, you know, I do not use this the anecdote often about, you know, Cuba and others. And he went there and he said, you know, we should have more cases of Cuba, the way Cuba uses sport. Right? And I was pleased because normally it's supposed to be him saying this. I mean, he was an athlete, a renowned Lord. It's now chair of president of YAF, World Athletics. But I can give you examples of other countries. In the Pacific, they do not have sufficient resources. What they do, they use sport to address social issues, inclusion, health, and also to recover from you know, illness, particularly you know, drugs and so on. But they open up to it. They say, you know, we do not have enough resources. For us, sport must also address some of the issues. In the Caribbean also, somehow they tend to cover this, not only for elite, but also the grassroots. I do believe that now it's a moment where we can reconnect with funding, and that is where the policy frameworks of the UN are useful, because, you know, we are discussing LDC conference by the end of the year. We are discussing SEEDS conference now. We discussed 2 weeks ago at the ECOSOC. SEEDS is Small Island Developing States. There are more than 50 countries. They are negotiating because even high-level and middle-income countries, they have difficulties. They have difficulties to have concessional loans. So that's the idea where I think we need to focus. We want to have more resources. Let's address some of those social issues, including sport.
Thank you, Giovanni. There is a question from John Woodall on the chat. The degree of oversight of sports by government is complicated, yes, and for many reasons. But he wonders whether the ILO and similar actors should or even can be seeking ways to promote sports in ways that bypass formal government supervision.
Well, the point here is, John, the point here, who are friends and foes in this, so who are the friends? I mean, normally we are UN agency, we have member states. So I think that they have the legitimacy to address a number of issues from a legal perspective and the legislation. I think we have to go beyond in another way. Let's put another way. We have a model of sport in Europe which is quite different from the model of sport in the United States. In the United States, everything is somehow around sport is professional sport. Even the university footballers now or university athletes are allowed to take a salary, but it is regulated. In Europe, the model is more social, which is good in a way, but you have no salary caps, for example, for athletes, which basically is disrupting the model itself. You have one employed in Europe for 10 volunteers. The volunteers are not paid. So if the volunteers would not be there, you could not organize sport in. So I think it's not a fact of bypassing the governments. I don't think there is anything that would come out positively out of it. I think you need to engage both the governments. You need to engage the sports organization. And the sports organization in some countries are under the national law. In some other countries, they have an autonomy, but they need to cooperate with the government. Because if you take the example of the National Olympic Committee in Italy, big Olympic committees, they do receive public funding and they have to be accountable for it. So I think we need to engage perhaps some new views, new avenues, making sure that there is enough money for sport for all and for social insertion. then there is enough for elite. I also think, out of the discussion on the Super League, that UEFA, FIFA may need to look into their own model and perhaps distribute more funding than they do when it comes to federation, national federation clubs, including clubs. Because, you know, they have the cup, and they make a lot of money out of the cups because that's an event. But they do not distribute at the same level as, for example, the IOC does. The IOC distributes far more, and they are proud to say that basically, you know, they keep some 20% to run the business, but basically more than 80% is distributed for sport entities of all kind, and NOCs and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni.
Manuela?
Yes?
If you don't have any other question?
No, not on the chat, not right now. Please go ahead.
Yes, I found it really very interesting, the presentation. Thank you very much, Giovanni. There are so many dimensions linked to sports. And I remember, it's not because you're Italian and others, this Roman poet that said, give the people bread and circus, and they will never revolt, never revolt. And I think that in the current society, it's a little bit that, or very much of that. And it's also a very big business. It's a huge business. In Europe, you're always between two sessions of something that is really very important. And I have the impression that the sports are led by TV rights and by big owners and investors from all over the world. If I spend some time of the year in the United States, and I'm always between two seasons, basketball season, baseball season, football American season, Super Bowl season, always with, and David Gore was reminding us that developing countries create more billionaires and millionaires than Switzerland. And I have this feeling that sports are creating more billionaires and billionaires than they are promoting the sport, because TV rights and salaries, they have gone up so high that there's no interest. Who cares about the base of the pyramid? The thing is that the people have a big circus. We move circus from circus to circus, and we create billionaires and we create things. In many businesses, everybody is against monopolies. Monopolies is something that is fought in everywhere. And I have the impression that if you see the Olympic Games, it's a monopoly, of course. If the UEFA and the FIFA, they are a monopoly, and people they are so happy of being controlled by the monopoly. I found it a little bit awkward that these 12 teams that wanted to break the monopoly in a way, everybody was against it. No, we want the monopoly. We want to be controlled by these guys in Geneva and in Lyon. We want the monopoly. So I found it a little bit like the Stockholm syndrome. We hate them. They get a lot of money, but we love them. And we love these big, huge monopolies. So I think this very mixed link between technology, that we can see sports from all over the world, between investors that are making so much money, between the media, and between also the political will to keep the people happy. I don't know if you remember the anecdote in Lima, in Peru, in our times, Giovanni. I was told that President Fujimori took the decisions in function of the results of the football games. If by any chance Peru would level or win to Brazil, the next week he would do whatever he wants, because everybody would be extremely happy. Or if any of the teams would do things. So there is a very important political link. And also what I'm missing in all this is to me the missing link is the glorification, the adulation of the athletes, that to me goes against of extending the sports and healthy habits to the pyramid. When I did the actual evaluations of many social security institutions, I found that if we reduce hypertension, diabetes, and lose some weight from the general population, and HIV/AIDS, which all of those are preventable, we could increase pensions something like 30 or 40%.
You're not surprised.
Pensions, and it was just because if people do more sports and we don't have so many hypertension and diabetes, we will free resources for other things. So it's a big trade-off. But I don't know what do you think about all these very, very complex of high level and pyramid developing, as David Rohr mentioned.
Well, I think one issue which I think the ILO is a kind of wise approach to things. I mean, sometimes a bit sound, but for example, all this issue of athletes, the IOC said, but you know, we give the chance to 80% of our athletes who are amateur to be staged on the game. So they have the destiny, their destiny is done through there. And the 20% is professional. So basically, by having that distinction, we don't know if you create more inequalities than you create opportunities and so on. So the ILO responded to this by saying, look, for us, whoever is working in sport is the contract will determine. And we know, because we have worked in the ILO, that even informal workers can actually be considered. So that is a breakthrough, and I think it's important to know. The second issue, monopoly, oligopoly, and I agree with you. I think it's the start of a debate. We shouldn't miss it, because they used somehow, you know, this, okay, is disruptive. So people say, well, you know, I don't want to see anymore another Champions League and so on. However, from the legal point of view, I would challenge anyone to tell me that this is not possible in the European law, in the national law. I mean, if you want to create a super league and you have the means to do so, normally you should be able to create. So even the response from UEFA, it's a bit awkward. I was seeing, you know, if you don't, you know, we have rules. If you don't comply with the rules, then, you know, you should be either sanctioned or something should happen. Fine. But beyond this, there is a matter of dialogue because I have read that the distribution of resources from UEFA out of the Champions League is very minimal. And I'm not talking about 30% and so. Perhaps I'm wrong. I cannot give you because I couldn't double check or triple check. I would have given to you. However, it is not what the IOC says, that they distribute more than 80% of their revenues out of TV rights, particularly. The other issue, I think that the athletes themselves, for the moment, they are silent. So you take Messi, Ronaldo, and so on, they are multi-millionaire contracts. But by the end of the day, what's the purpose? Because the clubs we are talking about are financially broken. That's why they decided to drift away and say, you know, I want a super league. The last point I think we need to also mention is that there are heavy, massive resources by sovereign funds. So you have seen sovereign funds from Qatar investing in clubs, football particularly. Then you have seen China coming to Europe and buying clubs. Then you have seen now United States buying other. You also see sovereign funds that they bought the Formula One. So this is something that might really address the issue. So the idea was, what about taxation? Because we never talk about this. I mean, that kind of investment should not be subject to some kind of taxation, like we are discussing taxation for digital companies and so on, and perhaps invest this into grassroots or youth, or as you say, the point you made about evidence-based. that is something very weird for me, because every time we say, yes, but we need to invest funding for sport because it's recreational, because it's healthy, I want to know how many countries are doing that kind of job that you would be doing, which means that you do an evaluation that the cost of non-communicational diseases is such, we increase the physical activity, we have a result which is quantified into, and we know what to reduce and what now. This is partially happening in Switzerland, but it's done more at the level of cantons and projects. It's basically spread through the companies. I wrote an article on sport in Switzerland 10 years ago, and I discovered this. But it is not something which is a federal policy on this. It's more at the level of the canton, which I think is superb, is good. But I've never seen this in Peru. I've never seen this in Latin American countries where sport is so important. I think we should be doing this kind of dialogue, engaging, and I have some frustration because I don't see this happening, unfortunately. I think this is massive resources, as you know so well as an actuarial. Perhaps we should you know, throw some ideas, Alejandro, on those issues. So, in numbers, perhaps it would spark the imagination of others.
Sure. Thank you, Giovanni.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, Giovanni. I do not see other questions right now, but I have my own, not really question, just reflection, and maybe you would like to comment on it. It's almost a philosophical question that comes across my mind from the perspective of the UN and the UN values that should be, as we said at the beginning, being conveyed through sports. The issues of team spirit, non-discrimination, transparency, integrity, well, you name all these kind of values, which are UN values. And my question is the following, my comment is the following rather. In my view, I look at sports, particularly at the international level, when you have a country against another one, I look at sports as a way to dilute what I call the bad nationalism, meaning the aggressive feelings of a country against another one that are diluted up to some level through a match of, I don't know, soccer or whatever it is. So this transformation of the bad nationalism into something which is less bad, which is better, which is almost good nationalism is, I think, exactly what the UN is looking for. So my question is, what should be done? What additional efforts, initiatives could be taken at the UN system level to promote this good utilization of sports to dilute the danger of having nationalism being used for negative purposes? I don't know if it makes sense. Maybe it is a little bit too abstract or too theoretical or too, wishful thinking. But for me, it is absolutely important that the UN really shows a message there and therefore a goal, even if it is a long-term one.
Actually, it does, and there are two ways to respond to it. One way is the fact that in the mandate of UNESCO, that one part of it is also devoted to use sport as a way to even to reduce. I don't remember the correct wording, but to reduce extreme violence. So, and of course, extreme violence is the language, but it's also the practice of violence and so on. So this exists, but we are also working, and this is something that has been developed quite well. In 2006, we published a book about the values and how you convert the values into skills. And you have soft skills and employability skills. It was a book and so on. And there are many projects now dealing with this kind of issue of how to use skills through sport, in sport, to make sure that we can either for social integration, for better dialogue, for employability, for soft skills, which are relational skills. So I think from that perspective, we moved quite a lot, and we are doing it with others. I think we were fortunate enough to have Erasmus Plus program funding a number of projects. So Europe has been quite forthcoming into this. We are now trying to settle this into something which is more, you know, there is a kind of either a certification, but there are systems in place. So we have a mechanism for defining competency framework, identifying skills, you know, along with the mandates of the entities, and then developing them. And on the other side, how we certify. I know that the certification is always complicated because it has something to do with either the European qualification framework, if we talk about Europe, or at the national level. But I think this is one of the bulk of the discussions. I think we have done quite well so far, surprisingly somehow. I was not expecting such progresses. However, there is something which is going to come up now, which is basically the fact that that we have a network of sport skills, and so you know that can be communicated to whoever wants to communicate. There is a call which I can share with you, which will be on a project called Monitor, to which we contributed, that they did at the grassroots level. So from that perspective, I think the youth have are better equipped. And I think that is an extremely important and valuable tool. The others, I think that you have more and more cases, very good cases to counteract the language which is intolerant or, you know, discriminatory and so on. And that is a good, actually that's a good progress. And the UN is working together on this. So we work with UNESCO's ILO, we work with the UNDESA. We did a policy brief, which I can share with all agencies to, you know, restart this united front with respect to sport. We need to get to the grassroots, and it is not easy because with the UN reform, those who are in charge of UN are DRCs in the countries, and are no longer individual agencies. We need to team up and do the work with them. And Cecile was one of them, so she knows how good it is and how challenging it is as well.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Yeah, let's hope that there is more progress in that direction very soon, because we are starting now the post-COVID economic crisis that will generate more and more tensions among countries. So I think that this is the moment where the UN should emphasize this kind of positive messages. I do not have other questions in the chat column, but I do not know if there are other comments or questions from our audience. Or maybe Alejandro, you would like to wrap up in a way insofar as possible, because the topic is quite complex, I must say.
Yes, thank you, Manuel. I think as Giovanni mentioned, we could spend hours discussing the different dimensions of sports and development. He mentioned many things that were even historical. 1920, 1924, then the meeting of the ILO 2015, the appointment of the special advisor to the Secretary General in the year 2000. But I would wonder, and it's possibly a question also to you, Manuela. We have the objectives 2030, the Agenda 2030. Do you see any chance, you or Giovanni, that sports would be included in the new agenda? Because we are just a few years away from the end of this 2030. Countries, I guess, they are preparing themselves, so will start soon be preparing themselves to include issues such as the pandemic that we have and the learnings from the pandemic in the new goals. But it would be a missed opportunity if we do not include also sports as a developer of better living and healthy conditions. When should that happen? When would that happen?
Well, if I may respond, because that's a very good question. My ambition and my questioning to the IOC and others is why they didn't work, or why we shouldn't work towards having an SDG on sport. And yet, if you look at the agenda in the introduction, there is a mention that sport is an enabler. But look at the pandemic. Look at the pandemic nowadays. The pandemic is such that the IOC was not able to organize the games, and now they are trying to organize the games with Tokyo. There is a lot of cost involved, basically paid by the Japanese government for security, for the vaccination, for you know, all the measures to be taken and so on, which is a repetition of 9/11 when it comes to, you know, when you travel now, you have to put up a number of other requirements. So it increases the cost. But during the pandemic, the federations who are funded by the games, because you have 24 federations, which are Olympic federations, they receive revenues because, you know, the IOC has the revenues from the television rights, and then they distribute to those. So they were advancing. But in some cases, because people are locally recruited, it is the government of Switzerland and the canton of Lausanne who was paying those salaries. And it is, you know, I'm not saying something out of my mind. I searched, you know, the articles and the references. So I'm just quoting something which was even in the press. So how enabler you become sport if basically you need to be supported by the society? So the point is not like, you know, criminalizing anyone, but by saying if you enable, it means that you have to provide something to make sure that the ecosystem is inclusive and also produce results. But then if you receive from others, then the others have also the right to see what's happening inside. Basically, this is where we stand now. Imagine if the games were not organized in July, because then the problem is the crisis is no longer 1 year. For the federations, it would be 2 years of closing. So they cannot organize events, so they cannot have revenues. They are not sustainable. So the system itself, how sustainable it is. So we get back to this, the question that you made, you put up, Manuela and Alejandro. So who is enabling whom at the end? So number one, we are interconnected. Number two, we need to engage into dialogue, substantive dialogue. So the issue of rights must be addressed. The issue of athletes must be addressed. The issue of revenues for recreational and healthy lifestyle, because then, you know, we also need to recover mentally from this lockdown. I mean, I relied heavily on what I do sport, even though at some stage I couldn't go out, only 1 hour. So I was happy to receive a kind of, you know, one of those static cycling, because that was, you know, mental relief. I still go to the office twice a week at least as a mental relief, even though we are on teleworking. So we need to get back to this, because and you have a lot of problems for youth. I have a son who was with us and was happily into brackets teleworking. He's now in Moscow doing a master, and he was telling us, my wife and I, that when he was going through the metro, because in Moscow now they are reopening and so on, sometimes he had to go out because there was such a, you know, when you see, and he was not crowded as he would have been in normal times. He had to go out and breathe and get back. So that was never happened before to him. Imagine many other cases. So I think, yes, to my views, I would definitely try to put sport as one SDG. That would be in 2030. In order to do so, we need to a coalition of forces. We cannot go one by one, in parallel. That doesn't make any sense. And I do hope that my call is not to divide. My call is that there is a convergence. There has been a call by, including a number of sport federations, even by Infantino, saying, you know, we want to cooperate because we are in trouble. I think we have to receive that call and engage seriously. And then, you know, if we don't engage seriously, then we have a number of accountability frameworks nowadays to get to concrete results. So we learn from the experience of the past 20 years. It took a while. I think we should have addressed some of the issues before. We did, but we did in parallel. And I think we need to do as coalition, as multi-stakeholders, as platforms. And definitely as UN agencies, we are stronger when we can learn and share. We can share our knowledge, but also we learn from others. Because sometimes bilaterally, in those kind of situations, we alone, we cannot only address the issues. That's why the UN as a team must work together. And I think, but not only as UN alone, we need to work with others. And I think we do it, and we have to maintain this perspective. We have to maintain a kind of results approach. You know, sometimes you have to be simple because we use a language which is complicated and the others do not understand us all the time. We are bettering ourselves, but we need to be told, you know, you're not good enough, do this, and we have to take it positively and go ahead. I think we learn from each other a lot, and I think that's great. Learning and sharing is not knowledge sharing. No, knowledge is, you know, the knowledge of Alejandro in Actuare is unbeatable. But then, you know, he's likable and he can go everywhere because he learned and shared, and he shared his knowledge. Knowledge is one, learning and sharing is another. I was telling a younger official, because she was interested to know about the skills. And I said, you know, when we have a mentor, you are somehow a senior, but you have to put in a position to listen, because otherwise you're not going to be useful. So that kind of learning and sharing is what we are actually learning within sport those days. And I'm very happy that this is happening. It's like great thing, we learn and share.
Manuela, do you have anything to add?
Well, I was thinking again about the SDGs. Maybe without waiting for the 2030 revision of the SDGs to include an SDG on sport. But in the meanwhile, maybe there is a way by revisiting the indicators of the SDG on health, where maybe a new indicator could be added through the interagency experts group on the role of sport on health. That could be already, you know, a sort of entry point in the meanwhile. And also maybe on the SDG 16 that is related with somehow human rights, justice, and these kind of ideas. Maybe there is also an entry point, a potential entry point there. I mean, I'm just, you know, thinking aloud, but certainly since it is an enabler that is already identified as such within the current SDG structure, maybe there is a way to push for something that then will facilitate a new SDG in 2030 on sport per se.
Yeah,
but,
we don't need to wait until then to do the work, for sure.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. Do not wait until 2030. In the meanwhile, at the UN level, there is certainly something that can be done according to all the values and the ideas that we shared and that you presented that are absolutely crucial right now. Over to you, Alejandro, for some...
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I think we just reached the limit of time. We could spend hours. Thank you really very much, Giovanni. This was really very encouraging for the discussion and for the imagination, as Manuela just already developed an idea on how to improve the indicators, which is great. I would just like to conclude. There is a phrase that I like very much from our colleagues in occupational safety and health. Mm-hmm. They mentioned that prevention does not happen by accident. And I think in the same way, sports will not become a global enabler of development by accident. It has to be a definite will and means behind that. And actors, as you, Giovanni, and others. I understand that you're writing a chapter of a book that will be published in October, something
Yes.
like that. Maybe that could give us the opportunity for a follow-up talk so that we can develop other things and you can share with us the insights of that book that you told us that you wanted to keep them confidential before the book was published.
Well, I think first I'm still reviewing, you know, because it's quite some references and so on. It covers 30 years, so it's quite extensive. It was a kind of chapeau of the book. I didn't take it from the technical one, but it was like, you know, counting a story, the itinerary through those years, and I share with you basically some of the what I see as you know, as limitation and strength and so on, and the conclusion and the way forward. I will be happy to share with you as soon as I can. I mean, I check with the editor, because I'm not the editor, I'm the one of the contributors, and yeah, as soon as possible. I think it's going to be edited here with Springer, who is from Switzerland, I understand. But we can definitely connect on some specific, more specific issues, and myself, but also others, we do my work and making sure that we can continue sharing. Even some more precise issues which I could not cover, for example, on some examples of rights, this issue of you know, discrimination, which we touched upon, but very briefly. The case of Semenya was you know, some of the cases in the past, and those. I will have a lecture on 20 with the University of Lausanne, and they asked, that was some time ago already, and they asked to even have a debate for once with the union leader. And this union is representing the athletes. So the focus is really, you know, professional athletes, collective bargaining, freedom of association. It's, I must say, those are the first time that this topic are taken from, you know, the perspective of fundamental human rights at work. Not only fundamental rights, but fundamental human rights at work, of which OSH, as you know, might become another right, fundamental rights, as part of the Declaration 1998 of on universal fundamental rights at work, which I think so. I think that perspective, which is more technical, which is more social and economic, I think it's something which was missing, because we had bits and pieces here and there, and now it's aggressively coming back, probably because of the position of the ILO since January 2020, but also because of the some heavy rights violations, and so we cannot turn a blind eye and say, you know, that's good. That's why the discussion on the Super League and so on, to my views, will come down to some more serious legal battle, or a dialogue, or, you know, something more rather important and technical, and not only, you know, populistic approach by saying, me too. I mean, Inter, we won the championship. I would like to win a Champions League, but if I have to choose personally, I take the point of Alejandro. Said, okay, so, you know, the rights of everyone, right?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Giovanni. Again, thank you everybody for participating in this great talk. I think, take care, stay safe.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to see you on the next great talk. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye.